I say that because with everything going on, we just had, in light of the Orlando shootings, the Congress just apportioned $40 or $50 million to pump up the Combating Violent Extremism program, which essentially, well, not essentially, it's a Muslim Brotherhood created program that was created by the Muslim Brotherhood in the United Kingdom and Britain. And the FBI and DHS in the mid-2000s went over to Britain and thought it was just the greatest thing, and we brought it here. And essentially it's a program to keep us from talking about the real threat. And our enemies created it. So no kidding, we're not going to talk about the real threat. So language is important. And just two things I'll say at the onset, so if you hear me say it, it'll make sense. Sharia, Islamic law, is what all of this is about. Everything. It's not just what they seek to impose on the world, Muslim world and the non-Muslim world. It is the blueprint for how they operate. And so how they speak is important. So for instance, when they say we denounce all acts of terrorism, they're not lying. Because in Islam, terrorism means to kill a Muslim without right. And there are only certain reasons Muslims can be killed under Sharia, for the right cause. Suicide in Islam is unlawful. But martyrdom, being a shaheed, dying in jihad, is the only way to guarantee you'll go to paradise. So when we talk about these, the phrase human rights, to us, it means something very different than it means to them. To them, it means the imposition of Sharia law. So that when they say we're all about spreading human rights around the world, they're not lying. You just have to use the filter of Sharia to know what they're saying. And how does that apply? It applies to everything that we're seeing right now. And the Orlando shooting is a great example. The Monday after the Orlando shooting, the FBI director Monday came out a week ago and said, we still are not sure about the motive.
Yeah.
And just this week, yesterday, Senator Tom Carper, I believe is the right name, who's a senior on the Homeland Security Committee, said, we're still trying to figure out the motive. Now, these are leading government officials in this war, and they're still not sure that that was an act of jihad, which they don't use the word jihad because we're told that only Muslims are allowed to use that word, according to the FBI and DHS. So when the enemy controls the language, they control whether we have victory or defeat. And I guess I'll kind of highlight my final points of my little introductory portion here to say the guy who ran the irregular warfare program at the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, was also in charge of the Combating Terrorism Technical Support Office for the Pentagon, said publicly on national radio show on Friday, I wrote about it, that the Muslim Brotherhood controls the national security decision-making process in the U.S. government with regards to how we deal with Islam. And he went further to say that the U.S. government is a tool for the Muslim Brotherhood on the international level. And just the examples, Saddam Hussein was putting the hammer down to the Muslim Brotherhood for years, and we killed him. Hosni Mubarak in Egypt putting the hammer down on the Muslim Brotherhood, we pulled him out of power. Muammar Gaddafi was killing the Muslim Brotherhood in Libya, and we killed him. And this administration provided arms and finances to Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria and Libya in violation of U.S. law. So when I make comments like you asked about in the very beginning, we have to understand the background of this, but the reality is we have leaders in our government who are treasonous and who are violating the law, who are providing material support to terrorists and aiding and abetting our enemy. How can we not speak very boldly about this? This is outrageous behavior, and it appears from where I'm sitting that the American public is just sitting on its hands. And even people that so-called get it are still slow to come to the table and realize what you're seeing with your two eyes is actually happening. And you're witnessing and you're living through it. So which side of this are you going to be on? Because enjoined with the jihadi movement is this Marxist socialist collaboration that quite frankly seems to be coming from one political party, but also within the Republican Party, whose leadership is, in my opinion, of working for years up on Capitol Hill, is just as corrupt as the Democrat leadership is. Yes. So what are we going to do with that is the question. And at the local level, these same Marxists in the media, in elected positions, in your Chamber of Commerce, these people are laying the groundwork and preparing the ground for what is sure to be in short order a massive assault by jihadi forces here in the United States. And the Marxist socialists are the ones laying the groundwork for this. What are they doing? They're advocating reducing our ability to keep and bear arms. They're attacking our ability to speak freely. They are coming after, they're allowing the Army and Marine Corps combat forces to deteriorate and shrinking them, letting the Navy and intentionally shrinking the number of ships and combat ships we have in the U.S. Navy, doing nothing at the border. They're bringing in only Muslims from the very nations where Muslims are killing Christians right now. And we're only bringing in Muslims from those countries in the tens of thousands who aspire to wage jihad against the United States. I mean, what can you call this but treason?
No, we talk about that, and I want to just go back to what you said, because I'm a little bit confused on the Countering Violent Extremism, the CVE. I looked up that bill, and so the bill has passed, the CVE, and
yes.
That's been in the works for about a half a year, John, or so. That's been in the works, and they just passed it to dedicate.
Well, this is just a funding measure. CVE has been a part of the U.S. Security apparatus since the 2008.
Okay, so they just refunded it then.
Well, they're just adding to the funding as a way to show their solidarity for Orlando. So the way we're going to show our solidarity for the victims of a jihadi is to support a program that was created by jihadis and given to the U.S. government to use, so we can't actually dismantle their network here. You couldn't make this stuff up.
I'm not sure if it was from one of your blog posts that I saw, but it could have been from someplace else. But it shows the timeline from the 9/11 Commission report, and it listed radical, Islam, jihad, extremism, and it listed all those words, and it put how many times those words were mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report. Then by the time you got to 2008, so I'm putting 2 to 2 together, that's when the CVE came out. The only word that's mentioned in that report now is religious. All those other words have been redacted out. So when our politicians get up there and they say they can't know the reason for the attack, are they just saying that because they don't want to be labeled an Islamophobe, or are they that stupid? If I can say that.
Well, okay, so that's the question. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what happened. And those documents, those were the national security documents. That's the FBI's counter-terrorism manual, and that was the Homeland Security Directive. So essentially a complete whitewashing by 2009 of how we talk about this threat. And do you want to know why we lost in Afghanistan and Iraq? Do you want to know why our government wrote constitutions in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2005 that created Islamic republics under Sharia, and we thought that was okay?
Oh,
I mean, so to answer your question, it's one of two things. Our president, our national security advisor, FBI director, DHS secretary, attorney general, And members of Congress who sit on these Homeland Security and Intelligence committees are either dumb as a cinder block, in which case they should be removed from their position because they're not competent, or they're not dumb as cinder blocks and they're simply incompetent at their job for another reason, or they're willfully not doing their job. If they're simply incompetent, they should be removed for cause. But when you take an oath to the Constitution, that is a legally binding oath that comes with the professional duty to know your enemy or do a due diligence to know your enemy. When you don't know the things that are easily knowable that people like you and people in that room know, who do not have a legal responsibility to know it, although I would argue as citizen soldiers we all do, different discussion, then if you're in the national security realm and you're the president or the national security advisor or the director of Central Intelligence, FBI, DHS, Attorney General, and you don't know it, that's unprofessional behavior. That's professional negligence. When Americans are dead in places like Orlando, Florida, Little Rock, Arkansas, Fort Hood, Texas, Boston, San Bernardino, because you didn't know what you're professionally required to know, that's criminal negligence, and we put doctors and lawyers in jail for that. And we should be holding the national security people to the same standard, which, by the way, legally they are. And so, I certainly advocate putting handcuffs on these people, because Americans are dead because they're incompetent. And they're either, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, but some of them don't get the benefit of the doubt. Some of them are willingly and intentionally doing these things, which then rises to the level of treason. I mean, I have been open for a long time to hearing the opposing position to what I'm saying, and I don't see anything factual that's on the table. The facts on the table is that these things have been happening. These people are pushing forward policies and actually taking actions that are directly supporting our enemy. But since the government, it's 2016, and since the government has yet to actually identify the enemy since 9/11, that's part of the problem.
Yeah, like you said, it's both Republican and Democrat. We point the finger at both parties in this situation. One good thing, and I'm not even sure now if this is really a good thing because nothing's really happened, but we've got three Congress people, Congresswoman Candace Miller, Congressman David Trott, and Mike Bishop. They signed, co-sponsored, the Muslim Brotherhood Terror Designation Act, HB 3892. Now, there's only 80 co-sponsors on that, but to me what's important is that it indicts CARE, ISNA, and the North American Islamic Trust in that bill. Do you see that bill going anywhere, or is this just grandstanding again and saying to people like us, see what I did, now go away? Because nothing's really happened with that. It's passed out of the Judiciary Committee. Now it's got to go to the House floor, but who knows when that'll happen. Do you have any knowledge about this bill or how important it could be if they did pass it?
Yes, I do have a lot of knowledge about that bill. And
I wasn't going to doubt you for a minute that you had a lot of knowledge. And thank God we've got you.
Yeah, we when that bill was first proposed, using a little different language by Congresswoman Bachmann several years ago, we helped.
And if I could just stop you right there, John, and you mentioned Michelle Bachmann, Hume Abedin, Muslim Brotherhood. Mike Rogers is right in our backyard. And if you could ever help us, because he appears on WGR Radio, which is the big radio station here in Detroit and Ohio. It reaches far out. And he gets on that radio station and bloviates how much he knows about national security. And we all know the stories about Hume Abedin coming out now. But sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to throw that in there. We know Mike Rogers and we know what he stands for too.
Yeah, he certainly has not been an ally of any kind in this fight against the jihadis, which is disappointing given his background. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
The bill you talk about, no, I don't think this is grandstanding. This is a legitimate bill that Senator Cruz put forth and a congressman from Florida put forth to lay the facts out on the table and hopefully have a discussion in Congress about it. But again, so I think it's worthwhile. I think I don't want to speculate what will happen. If it's like everything else going on, the Congress has been negligent in every other aspect, although they have fought pretty hard to at least stop some of the legislation that this president has tried to push through. And in that, they probably deserve some credit. But on this issue specifically, they have not. I mean, you would be amazed, and I believe everyone in the room would be amazed at the utter gross lack of any clue whatsoever about what is going on in this war by nearly every single member of Congress, save maybe a dozen. If then, that's probably an over-exaggeration. It's pitiful. It is pitiful. And one of the things, I don't know if you want to talk about it now, maybe we talk about it towards the end, but when we talk about solutions, the strategy that we're working in a few states that is having a great impact, quite frankly, or we're developing the ability to have a great impact, is this war is going to be won or lost at the local level, at the state level. The FBI and the military and your Congress, the biggest thing, they're no longer, these organizations, DHS, they're no longer neutral. They're no longer just, they're actively working against people like us. And that's the problem. That's a huge part of the problem. They're no longer just incompetent or not doing anything. The U.S. Attorney's Office, many of them, and the FBI are actively trying to teach law enforcement. And the law enforcement that's had our training programs and actually has come to see what's actually going on, realize that what the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's offices, and FBI are teaching them is actually contrary to the truth. It's not just, they kind of dance around it. And so we have a real problem on our hand. But if those people that are in the room there with you tonight understand the breadth and depth of the Islamic movement in the United States and the network that is made up of all of the prominent Islamic organizations, thousands, and almost all of the 2,400 Islamic centers, mosques in the United States, which they say, our enemy says, are the place from which they're going to launch the jihad. I think we ought to take them at their word. And if you've ever seen a mosque being built, you'll notice the first floor is made up of 36 to 44-inch concrete rebar supported with either no windows or very narrow vertical windows, which as a former combat Marine, I can tell you what that looks like. And the fact that all the mosques that our military goes into and has been in Afghanistan and Iraq had weapons in them. And when we've gone into them in Europe, they've had weapons in them. And when we've gone into the couple that we've been in the United States, we know there was weapons training in there. So what is it that's confusing? So when you understand the massive network here, you realize this is an insurgency. And for anybody in the room that's in the military, a counterinsurgency, the tip of the spear becomes local police. And it's at the local level that this is going to get done. And if we don't start acting now, like today, like that's true, and that this is August 1939 in Poland, and everything seems okay, seems like things aren't quite right, but for the most part, got my investment portfolio, I'm going to the movies, going to dinner with my friends, children are graduating from high school or college, and everything seems okay. But when the other shoe drops, it's going to drop quickly. And if your community is not prepared and organized for that, you're going to have a lot of catching up to do, and it's going to make matters much worse. We just don't want to think like that. I would just say, again, believe what your eyes are seeing. Look at what's going on in Europe. Look at the strategic picture of what they're doing. Remember, right now, the Islamic movement is not even focused on us. They're not focused on the West at all. They're still focused on Muslim countries and getting them to abide by Sharia and impose Sharia. As soon as they start making that turn, which I believe the beginning of that turn has started, it's not going to be one guy in Orlando and a couple people in San Bernardino and 4 or 5, 6 in Brussels or Paris. It's going to be 2 or 3 dozen. And they're going to be hitting places all over the country. You're going to have thousands of jihadis hitting 50 or 60 places across the country on a good day. I mean, we can't even conceive of that in the chaos. And by the way, the fact that they're totally merged with the Marxist socialist cabal in the United States, like Black Lives Matter, so throw in a dozen or so cities being looted and burned by those people that are highly organized and very well funded by the people that are funding this. I mean, it is going to be an absolute goat rope, and I just don't think I can tell you your local police are certainly not prepared because I work with law enforcement all across the country, and just them coming to learn about the Muslim Brotherhood's jihadi network puts them on their heels. But if you're in the right area, they're already getting to work on that. So that was a big chunk of information, but I think it's something that we need to grasp onto this reality. And if it's too hard for you to digest and comprehend, and it's just too much for you, that's okay. I get that. But just, you need to move out of the way and let the people that need to do the work do the work. I mean, this is coming to a very critical stage right now.
Yeah, I did want to get to that point where, what do we do? And I did see on your website that to contact your sheriffs and your police officers. But if I can just take one step back, John, and, that Muslim Brotherhood Terror Designation Act implicates CARE. And CARE has a huge presence here in Michigan. CARE Dawood Walid walks the halls of Lansing, Michigan, our capital. And even another gentleman, myself, ran head-to-head with him at a hearing. But that's another gig. But China, give us a little bit of an idea how, and our governor, Governor Snyder, probably about 1.5 years ago, stood on the stage of a ISNA convention in downtown Detroit, which we all sent him emails to say, don't do it. You're supporting the enemy by doing that, but he didn't, that was no concern with him. How do we get CARE out of Lansing, or how much of a web does CARE have throughout the country and the Muslim Brotherhood within our Congress? And I know you talk about that pretty extensively also.
Well, first of all, CARE is a Hamas group. That's not up for debate. So our buddy Dawood is a Hamas operative. So I would just ask the question, what do you do with terrorists? I mean, if an Al-Qaeda guy was knocking on your door, how would you respond? And you don't need to answer. I'm just asking.
Right.
The fact that your governor aided and abetted and materially supported terrorists, what do you do with that? I don't see anybody on the news protesting. I don't see anybody calling for his head, and I don't mean that literally, but calling for him to be removed. It's just another day in politics. And so long as there is no consequence for elected officials, why would they change? Why wouldn't they do whatever they want to do so long as it makes them happy and makes them feel good, and no matter that they're aiding and abetting the enemy? I mean, this is outrageous conduct. And I don't know what you want me to share about the network. CARE's influence is significant, and how that is amazing to me, since it's a terrorist group. And if we're going to put a drone strike anywhere, it ought to be at CARE headquarters, as opposed to inviting them into the U.S. Capitol. I mean, I'm serious. This is such egregious conduct. And we're sitting down and talking about it, not you and me, but in other places in Washington, D.C., we sit down and have these discussions as if there's a reasonable counter position. And there is none. I mean, so the jihadi network here in the United States is, I don't know, it can get worse, but they're about tapped out. And when I use the quote, I agree with the quote. Let me say it again so it sinks in. Our enemy controls our national security apparatus. How's that for clarity?
When you say that to police officers and sheriffs, and I'm sure you run into politicians, who gives you the better reaction of, we've got to do something?
Well, I think when I talk to law enforcement, I keep it at that level. I keep it at just give them a few nuggets from the Holy Land Foundation trial and a few other trials that make it very clear that all of these groups that we're talking about are jihadis. They're batting for the other team. And those groups, as I show them, exist in your community, sir. And by the way, all these groups, the Muslim American Society, the Muslim Student Association, the Islamic Society of North America, Council on American Islamic Relations, are all tied to every one of these jihadi acts in the United States, including the Islamic centers that we know are either Muslim Brotherhood or Tablighi Jamaat, but they're all part of the jihadi network. And so Omar Mateen and the Sarnea brothers in Boston and the San Bernardino shooters and all of them, whether it's Chattanooga or Nashville or Little Rock, all of these folks are tied to these centers or organizations that we know are part of the network, and those centers exist in your community. So the same stuff is going to come out of there, except the longer you wait, the less ability you're going to have to do something about it.
So without you being right next to us, when I walk into my sheriff's office and get that meeting with him, this is something I've got to talk. This is what we should be doing on an individual basis, or a group of us walking into our sheriff's office with that appointment and stating these concerns we have about the safety in our community.
Right, and I think the way you do the meeting is as important as what you say. I mean, who's going in there? I mean, in your group, who are folks that have served in the military? I get one of those people. Who is somebody that's been in law enforcement? I get one of those guys. Who's somebody that's a businessman or woman in the community and has a lot of contacts in the community? I take that, and the three of you go in and sit down. Maybe four, but I wouldn't, make it look like there's a mob, but two or three key people that can go in and say, we have a concern. Here's what the facts are. These groups, including Islamic centers, exist right in our community. There's no evidence showing us that these groups are not the exact same groups that they are in every other city that are producing jihadis who are killing people. And they exist right here in our community. We want to know, what can we do to help you get your people trained and help you prepare, as opposed to what some people do when they walk into the offices of members of Congress or state legislators or law enforcement and say, hey, there's a real big problem here. You're not doing anything about it. Why are you such a jackwagon? That's actually probably not going to endear you to the sheriff. But, if you say, look, we believe there's a problem. Are you aware of it? We want to help you. We want to, whether it's bring the training there, there are things we want to do. And that's why we exist. And that, the odd thing is, we're the only, understanding the threat, UTT is the only organization in the country that's training law enforcement in the real threat and actually giving them investigative solutions and talking to them about the broader strategy and how they have to work with the community. And I can tell you, in a couple areas we're working, cops are already on it. Okay. And so once they're armed, listen, there is nobody more devious or savvy on the planet than a Marine Lance Corporal and a local police officer. So when the local cops get this information, they will do everything within their ability to go after these folks and start brainstorming at the local level. And that's what you need. But citizens need to be involved in this because you can provide a lot of things to the law enforcement community. Like I just talked to somebody today in another state who is literally funding our 3-day training program and probably going to fund at least one law enforcement person to go to the Train the Trainer program, so one of those law enforcement people can go back to the community and train other police officers. I mean, those are the kinds of things, but that's not the only solution. You've got to start getting organized at the ground level. You have to have citizens, and there are some out there, retired law enforcement, others that have investigative. You have to decide, if things start melting down in my community, what is our plan, number one, for defending neighborhoods? What is our plan for communicating? What is our plan for, and just think through the logical things you need. Because it's not just going to be a gun battle. That's not what this is going to necessarily devolve into. There are going to be power plays in the community, and you need to have people who have their ear to the ground in the Marxist organizations and in the Islamic organizations. So that means people are going to need to do those kinds of things to gain intelligence out of that community, so you have a heads up to when things are starting to melt down. But I don't, we're trying to encourage that in communities, but these are things that have to be done thoughtfully, have to be done with people that have some experience in that, and you have them in your community.
Yes.
But you got to start thinking that way. That work has to begin tonight. I mean, that discussion has to happen tonight, because we are in my best guess is 4 to 14, maybe on the outside 18 months. But you're not looking at a long window here. We're not looking 5 to 10 years for things start to devolve into that. I mean, we've already seen it. We're seeing it in this people attacking Mr. Trump, a guy, charged with attempting to assassinate Mr. Trump. And who was he? He's a Marxist. He's a socialist. He's a Brit, illegally here from overseas. My guess is funded by, a George Soros organization, probably not by the jihadis. But these are who these people are. These people portend to be people of, oh, we care. These are people these are the people of eugenics. These are the George Bernard Shaws of the community. They portend to be writers and poets when actually what they want is people lesser in the society to be killed. And they speak like that. That's what Marxism is. That's what socialism is. That's what you get. So no matter how you paint them, these are people running your businesses. These are pastors in your churches. You need to know who they are, and you need to be able to identify them in your community. Because when things start to devolve, you know what side they're falling on, and it's not your side.